Hi, I'm Greg Schaefer, and welcome to the virtual CISO moment. Adam Evans joins us today. He is the AVP Information Security Officer for Generations Bank. Adam, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Greg.
Would love to hear about your career path. I always like finding out why people decided to get into this crazy field of information security and how you've navigated that to get to your current position of security officer for a bank.
Yeah, so I mean, ever since I was young, I've always enjoyed technology and kind of figuring out how stuff worked. And I remember, I think my first experience with cybersecurity was actually in high school, where my friends and I would kind of try to find ways to circumvent the web content filtering for the school. and,
You
and
know, I just have to stop there for a moment. Back in part of my career where I was working for a university, I was fighting people like you who were trying to circumvent the content, trying to get to Napster and all that. So enemies have reunited on the podcast. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I mean, we would actually like, and I think this kind of I've always been an info sec, because we would actually go back to the IT team at the school and say, hey, look, this is how we were able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought it was fun. You know, they were great guys and we got along with them well. So they would, put additional controls in place or change how they were doing it, and then we would go right back to finding more ways to circumvent the controls that they put in place. And
They should have given you a bug bounty of a better grade or something.
yeah. I think it kind of started when I was a kid in high school, and then my first job, my first role was actually IT technician for a small IT shop in Auburn, and for a company called ADC, owned by John Robson. And they gave me the opportunity, after a few years there, they gave me the opportunity to kind of implement some ideas I had to start offering managed services to some of their customers. Mm-hmm. So we started doing things like managed AV and firewall and some network assessments and stuff like that. And so I started to grow that side of the business. So I started to get really involved with that. And meanwhile, as I'm doing this, I was going to school for IT. And towards the end of my schooling, just before graduation, they said, hey, you gotta pick a concentration. So I said, okay. Well, cybersecurity was an option. I was always interested in that. It was something that I thought would be applicable regardless of what role I ended up in IT. So I ended up doing that. And that led me to an opportunity that I had at Generations Bank. They saw that I had a good cybersecurity foundation. So they brought me on as a technology advancement specialist, mm-hmm. where I was able to kind of grow as a technologist and as a security practitioner. And the leadership here, the CIO, Derek Dyson, he's always been very encouraging to kind of advance my security skills. So, over the last 6 years, I continued to develop that and gain education and certifications. And just recently, the board and the leadership have entrusted me with the role of Information Security Officer, where I am now.
That's an awesome track. I love to hear when organizations they develop and promote from within, because I think that that's one of the best ways that we can address what the so-called talent gap, if you will. Give people a chance and teach them and give them a chance to learn. So I'm glad to hear that there are organizations that do that. Now I understand. The bank that you work for would be considered a small mid-sized business, and small and mid-sized businesses, even sometimes I think people don't realize that banks are actually businesses. I mean, it is actually a business, and it has a product. It's the efficiency ratio is probably one of the most important metrics in banking, but smaller banks, just like, and I came from a community institution myself for a while, but smaller banks, just like all SMBs, they have rather unique and also not unique information security considerations. So I'd like to hear from your perspective now as from your career perspective. What are some of the most significant threats that you feel to information security in the small and mid-sized business arena?
And it's exactly right what you said. We, as a financial institution, we certainly have some very unique risks, but at the end of the day, we are a small business and we have the same challenges as every other small business. I think some of the biggest challenges with security facing small businesses today are insider risk. I feel that as technology becomes, security becomes easier to implement and cheaper to implement, and it becomes better, we still have a gap with insiders. And when I say insider risk, I don't necessarily mean malicious insider threats. I mean, it could be a lack of security awareness training. It could be shadow IT. It could be a culture that doesn't put security first. So you have technical personnel that kind of get tunnel vision, and kind of security can kind of go on the back burner. So all those different things, I think, are a challenge for SMBs now.
Well, and it could be also configuration risk in a way, because as you were saying that, I was thinking right before we started to record this podcast, I was working on sharing a file external to our organization, and the Microsoft tenant admin has restricted file sharing to just local. And so I'm trying to figure out now what's the best way to change that, because I am the admin too. So it's like, but I don't want to open it up for everybody, and I need to make sure the easy way is just to say, well, everybody can do it. But then to your point, that becomes an insider threat, because you've now removed a control that could protect someone from doing something accidentally. Because you said that it's not necessarily malicious. There's this whole other bunch of things that can happen.
Right. And we have to keep the lights on, and sometimes we get focused on that, and that, we have a mission that we have to do. We have to complete that mission. But so sometimes, security can kind of go to the wayside as we focus on that. So it's a challenge to kind of balance that those two aspects. They're both important, but it's a challenge to balance both of them.
So you mentioned shadow IT, though. It's like, talk about that a little bit more, because some people may not be familiar with that terminology. It sounds awfully ominous.
Yeah. So when I think of shadow IT, I mean, it could be something as simple as, hey, I need to move my computer across the room and go plug it into a different port. I'm not going to bother IT with it. I'm just going to do it on my own. Or it can be, I don't want to put in a ticket, or go through the process of procurement. So I'm going to go on Amazon and buy my own IT equipment and plug it into the network, or plug it into my computer, rather than go through appropriate channels where technology can be vetted, where there can be an appropriate change control process, things of that nature. So that's what I consider shadow IT.
So I think that that's, though, an important thing to bring up, because I think that a lot of times small and mid-sized business owners, they don't realize the threat that can be. They don't really see it as an identification. They think that it's like, well, we have this technology stack in place, and that should satisfy all the needs of the users. But if you get users, employees, staff that are trying to find ways around it, kind of almost like being in high school and trying to find ways around getting music. It's like your mission back then, your business, if you will, was to try to find a way to procure these files at a discounted rate, or to point out to the school IT the flaws in their program. The same thing here with small and mid-sized businesses. Their mission is to accomplish the business. And so shadow IT typically will come about if IT Central is failing in providing that. So I wonder, what do you think are like maybe some ways that a small and mid-sized business could prevent the proliferation of shadow IT in their organization?
Interesting. So I know that some vendors offer portals where you can kind of go on and purchase pre-approved IT equipment. So it's already been vetted by the organization. It goes through appropriate suppliers. I think that's a great tool that businesses can employ to alleviate some aspects of shadow IT. I think paying attention to the metrics, making sure that tickets are being answered appropriately and in a time appropriate manner, making sure that employees don't feel like they have to go outside of appropriate channels to get their job done, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yeah, between those two, though, that's a good start.
And you also touched upon another word that a lot of times people don't think about, and that's culture. And I think fostering an information security culture is so important. A positive culture at an organization. I like to occasionally give this one example, and apologies to if my colleague from some time ago hears themselves in this story, I apologize in advance, but I've already told them back then that I didn't agree with this position. The position was about somebody fails a phishing test, because you have to give phishing tests on occasion. It's just good for muscle memory, and regulators in the financial services field typically, require it. But he wanted to institute a program. He might have actually, I think, for a short period of time, where there was actual punitive actions for failing phishing tests to the point of like losing like percentage of bonus. And that created a walking on eggshells type of environment in the culture where folks were afraid to click on anything in an email, and folks were afraid to talk with the information security officer. So what are some things that you can think of that can help enhance culture? I always like to start with, maybe you do too, but I like to start with trying to push forward the idea that information security is not about saying no. It's about saying yes, but trying to find a way to do it, what you need to do in the least risky manner. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think with phishing, fish tests in particular, you have to be really careful, because you want to be approachable. You don't want somebody to be so worried about punitive actions that they don't report an incident, or and I always tell folks, I can't promise that there won't be consequences to actions, but the sooner you notify us, the sooner you tell us, the faster that we can take actions. With fish testing, though, it's important to kind of reward people, and I mean, you don't want people that are continuing to make continuing to exhibit risky behaviors. You don't want them to continue to have access to your networks, but yeah, you have to be really careful not to make them feel uncomfortable to the point where they won't open any emails and they're calling help desk every time they get something. That's not right either.
Well, I mean, we're human. We're human beings. So it's like we have our human fallacies and our tendencies, and so I think that sometimes we need to recognize that when we're dealing with potential incidents. I always shudder to think of someone like coming down too hard on somebody. Now, if it's a repeated failure of the same thing and you've had training to try to mitigate it, that's another story. But from my perspective, at least, it would seem to be that from an information security culture perspective, if you create that human aspect in the culture, that's going to help your job in the long run, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think more often than not, people take security seriously. They understand the importance to it if they have the proper training. And if they make a mistake, they feel terrible about it. You don't have to beat them up. They're going to feel bad about it already. So kind of whenever I see something like that happen, when I see somebody make a mistake, I always take a moment to really show them what went wrong, because it's never one thing. It's never they just click the link. I always, every employee that I talk to, it's always, well, this particular thing happened, and then this element was true in the scenario, and it's always a series of different things that led up to them clicking the phishing link. And so kind of listening to their story of how they process that in their mind, and then kind of showing them how they could do it differently in the future, and then taking that information that you learned about that thought process, and then kind of including it in training in the future, or in a very generic way, obviously. But I think that that's a really good way to kind of that positive reinforcement to the employee when they have a learning opportunity like that.
I'm really glad that you brought up the concept of like it's never one thing per se. It's usually the last thing, and they teach that in pilot school, and it's actually unfortunately more timely now given the tragedy that happened at Reagan National Airport a couple of nights ago from when we're recording. But when I was learning to become a private pilot, that was one of the things that they taught. It's like it's always the end, the last thing. So you have this chain of events, and I'm certain that with the tragedy in Washington, that we're going to find out that it wasn't just one thing, that there were some things that led up to that collision. But it's the same thing in information security, as you were saying, that usually it's more than one thing, which now kind of brings us to training that I wanted to talk about for a moment, because sometimes I think people get the idea that we're training them on stuff that really doesn't make any sense. But what we're really trying to do is to fill, or at least address, all gaps in a layered information security program. Do you see importance in trying to address all gaps in a layered information security program?
In what regard? Could you expand on that just a little bit? I don't think I understand.
Well, what I mean is you have there are certain elements. We don't just want to train on one particular thing, like don't click on this link. You might want to train on don't leave papers out on your desk. You might want to train on make sure that you don't have someone else log into your machine. You want to make sure that you lock your machine or you lock your office. So any one of those things, like if they fail. If you're using your example as a bank, you're in a bank. I don't know about you, but I had my office in a couple of locations when I was CISO for a bank, and one was at a branch, and it would have been trivial for someone to walk behind teller row or through one of the doors and come to the back offices. And I had sensitive information in my office. I would have to have all these layered controls in place, because if one failed, it could make a difference. All of them. I'd lock the door, make sure that the machine's locked, make sure I don't have papers out on my desk. If I fail, I shouldn't say if one failed, everything would happen. But if all failed, if I left papers on my desk and it had to deal with a fraud incident, and I also had some images on my machine dealing with it, and I left the door open to my office and did not close the door to the private part of the brain. See what I'm saying?
Yeah,
making sure that we address in training all of those control elements that can fail, as opposed to someone just saying, well, I never have anything on my desk and I always lock my machine, so I'm fine. So why should I listen to this stuff? That's what I'm talking about.
Right. Wow. That's a really good point. I didn't think about that, but it's absolutely true. As you kind of go through these different things that might seem trivial or benign or irrelevant to a particular individual. It's if you start to get complacent and you don't follow all those controls, the rest can kind of follow, and it could lead to an incident. So yeah, you're absolutely right with that.
Yeah, a buddy of mine, he was a operational risk manager at the bank that I was working at the time. He used to say that what he wanted to do is he wanted to implement a risk management mindset in everybody at the organization. Now, whether he was successful in that endeavor or not, I don't know, because how do you measure that? But that was at least the general idea. So think about all of your risks that you're dealing with in whatever job you're at. I often wish that other businesses had like what you see in banking a lot. There's usually a chief risk officer, because that is the business of banking. Banking is all about managing risk. That's exactly but if you look at it with businesses, it's the same thing too. It's all about managing risk. But when you're a security person in that sort of environment, and you start thinking about all of the other risks that can happen. I don't know about you, but I get kind of stressed out, and kind of freaks me out sometimes. I mean, and particularly, I mean, I go back to my experience first working for a bank, where I'd been working for government agencies my entire career. And now it's like I'm working for a bank and I'm working in corporate. I'm like, you want to talk about being a fish out of water. It's a good thing for your career to shake yourself up every now and then. But my goodness, where are the risks? I was stressed out. And I encourage folks on this podcast that they need to deal with stress in a positive nature. I've talked about ways that I've done it positive. I've talked about ways I've done it negative. So I'm curious, Adam, what's one of the things that you do to decompress from all the stresses in information security?
Yeah, so there's actually three things that I do. The first one is exercise. Any type of exercise, I think, is good.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm getting on the bike downstairs after we're done with this podcast. So
yeah, it's great. It does great. It lowers your cortisol levels. It's excellent. Mm-hmm. The second thing that I do is mindful meditation, like Headspace, like that app. That's been very helpful to me. And the third thing, my favorite thing to do, is watch soccer or go explore new places with my wife's son and soon to be daughter. We're gonna be having a daughter soon, so going with my family, doing things with my family is really what helps me.
Congratulations! I'm very happy to hear about that, and you're probably going to need more of that meditation app after that point in time. But I think that's great, and so I'd love to hear about, of course, on the podcast, my final question usually is talking about future plans. One of your future plans I already know now.
Yeah.
Anything else you would like to talk about?
I as far as plans, I'm really excited to see where my career goes. There's a lot of things happening right now that are really exciting. Wherever I end up, though, I definitely want to help other security professionals develop their skills and kind of pay back some of the kindness that the IT and security community has shown me throughout my career. And but working in the financial industry, I really enjoy that. So I think I'll probably continue in banking.
Well, I can say this. I've said this before on the podcast, that after having gone through a couple of decades now in my career, one of the things that stands out as far as like being successful in the career is, at least for me, is that if you have a heart of a servant, you will always be successful. Things will always happen. I frequently will quote my friend Evan Francine on this podcast as well too. He's the CEO of Secure Studio and FR Security Studio. Excuse me. They run the vCISO certified vCISO certification. But anyway, he says one of his mantras is mission before money. If you focus on mission, the money will come. If you focus on money, you probably will never fulfill the mission, or you might not. So that's my advice to you as you go down your path. And I also like to sometimes say that, career is actually a long game. So it's like, I think if I could say one of the mistakes that I've made in my career is not properly vetting. There's one, I think everybody should have that one job in their career where they're like, oh, I made a mistake. And I have one, and I didn't properly vet it. I didn't vet the culture. We talked about the culture. I wish I had listened more about the culture. So, but good luck in your journey. I think that's great. Congratulations on, almost being a new dad again. And,
thank you.
And really appreciate you sharing your insight today with us on the podcast this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me on it. This was a wonderful experience, and I really appreciate everything that you do. I love this podcast. It's been very helpful to me in my career. Thank you. Okay, and your check for that endorsement will be in the mail. Everybody, stay secure.